So welcome everyone to Adventures in ecoRelations. This is a monthly Zoomcast that I host on the fourth Thursday of each month. And I invite guests to for us to have conversations and explore our personal relationships with who I call nature elders, who are the wisdom keepers, the wise ones that can take the form from the tree nation, the water nation, the rock nation, the fairy, the star beings. There's lots of them. But we begin often with the relatives that are embodied here on Earth. So Michael is dedicated to the ancient yew tree as a living mystery, a being he has named as an embodied eternity on the earth. He was called into the living mystery 29 years ago by a solitary yew in southeastern Scotland that not only renewed his dying body, but also gave him the living template of an embodied healing practice and spiritual teaching known as the Yew Mysteries. So I'd like to begin today with really honoring that mystery. So I invite all of us to just close our eyes for a moment and withdraw our attention from the screen. And center ourselves in our place inside, where we are one with everything and everyone. Great Mother, Father, God, Creator, we give thanks for this day. We give thanks to all those who have gone before us, who prayed us into existence. We give thanks to all those wisdom keepers who have provided teachings for us and a path to walk upon. And we also acknowledge those who walk the path of great mystery as much as they do the known. And for this, we honor this evening the sacred yew and one man whose path has become inexplicably intertwined with the legacy and the reality of consciousness, you consciousness, that is alive today. So I invite you, Michael, to take us into the world of the you.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielea. That was beautiful. So imagine that you're walking in a forest and the trees around you are recognizable as trees. You recognize their form. And you're walking and you begin to see ahead of you something that really isn't really very tree-like, that is more like a upturned bell, a bell shape, something a little different, that is maybe 60 feet tall. And you explore a little further and you realize that it might be as much as 400 feet in circumference, like a great skirt, like this bell has great sweeping skirts that come down and spread across the ground. And then you look a little bit more closely and you see an entrance. You see some kind of space, some kind of dark space at the foot of that bell shape. And you feel compelled to enter that space. So you have to crouch, you have to bow to enter this space. There's a kind of a gesture of bowing that takes place. So you bow and you then proceed into this dark space, which you realize very quickly is actually a tunnel. But it's a tunnel actually composed of branches. If you try to stand up, the branches will strike your head. If you try to reach out a hand, you will touch a wall of branches to one side. A hand, you'll touch a wall of branches to the other side. And you know you must proceed. So you keep moving through this tunnel. You're moving into this unknown place. You don't really know where you're going. It's quite dark. And the tunnel is perhaps 40 feet long, if not slightly longer. And it gradually inclines as though you're ascending a mound. And as you come to the apex of this mound, you feel a sense of space opening there. And you come out of the tunnel and you enter basically a large cavern. And you wonder, how can this be? How can there be a cavern here? What is this being that I'm encountering? And in the gloom, you see the trunk of the tree in the center of this cavern. You realize that you're actually entered into this matrix of a being, this sort of inverted cauldron, if you like. And you look around and you see that all the branches are growing from about 12 feet up into of this trunk. They're swooping, making great arching movements, like sort of the flying buttresses of a Gothic cathedral. And then they're descending back to the ground and continuing along like sort of serpents along the ground towards a periphery, and inscribing this perfect chamber space. And you realize that you're actually inside of a being. You're inside of a yew tree. And you're inside of a yew tree that has fulfilled itself, a yew tree that has been allowed to take a gesture that is what all yew trees to some extent seek to do, to fulfill themselves, to create an inside that's separate from the outside. So when you're inside that space, you begin to realize that the air is different, the atmospheric pressure is a little different. You feel almost like you're touching fluid rather than air. And you begin to feel perhaps a little drowsy, a little altered in your consciousness. And you might sit with your back against the trunk, or you might lie on the ground. And you begin to feel something happening in your blood, on the surface of your skin, something happening in your blood that seems to be speaking to you, as though there's a voice in this space, and it sort of speaks into your blood. And it begins to heal you. It begins to give you a sense of peace. It gives you a sense of stillness. And slowly you yield into this consciousness. You yield to this mind. And the more you yield, the more you're healed. And that's really the entering of the mind of a you, really. Essentially, my experience of first encountering the you. So just sharing that with you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Would now be a good time just to show a few pictures of this particular being that you've
I think so.
led us into. So let's give people a little bit of a factual visual, and then we'll go into more about their principles.
So perhaps now you can see the shape that I was leading you into. And this is coming out of the tunnel and into the chamber itself. So you can see this shape that this being has created, this inside dimension that sort of invites you in and begins to change your consciousness. And in fact, here's another of the same tree. You can see a little bit here of its height. It's about 60 feet tall, this yew tree in the southeast of Scotland. And these little figures down there on the left, that the one with the darker blue jacket is actually a local tree surgeon who he was the person who took me to the yew way back in the day. So this picture I just found by accident, and there he was standing there with a local writer who's next to him. So that picture has particular significance for me because there's the man who actually led me to the yew in my first encounter. And here we see another image of it, this more of a pan image, obviously. And you can see the extent of the branch layering. Branch layering is where the yew's branches will come back to the ground and will proceed across the ground and will take root. And if you look to the right and left of that picture, particularly the right of the picture, you'll see where a new forest is emerging. So the yew is creating clones of itself. It's creating this peripheral forest of itself that actually begins to surround it and enclose it. So, people say that the yew grows something in Scotland, and that in that part of Scotland, 0.02 inches per year. So that might give some sense of how old that being might be. So something to ponder.
Michael, in our conversations that we've had so far, I've been really surprised by the number of places and ways that yew has woven really still in our places of names and other ways it's showing up that's not actually named yew in English that we would recognize. Yeah, can you say a bit more about just how woven actually yew is in our society even today?
Absolutely, yeah. It's extraordinary how many names of, say, rivers, hills, mountains, towns are named after the yew, particularly in the British Isles, but also throughout Europe, in fact. One of the most obvious examples is York in England, and York means actually yew town. So I always, laugh at, the notion of New York City as being new yew city, so and as I was saying to you just the other day, that when I visited the UN building, surrounding the UN building in New York City were, believe it or not, yews, many of them. So there's a bigger picture there. But so the yew really is imprinted into the land, particularly in the British Isles, but throughout Europe. And even where the yew stands, where the yews have been removed or been destroyed, perhaps hundreds of years before, the name of the yew is still in the land. The presence of the yew is still there. So it's quite an amazing when you begin to discover the name, you know, for example, in York and up in the north of Scotland, there's other places named after the yew. On Shetland Isles, there's places named after the yew. So it's everywhere you go in the United Kingdom, you'll see the name of the yew reflected back on you. And for those who want lists of those names, I mean, they're quite easy to access. I have a list of reading material on my website if people want to look into this a little bit more. And also the great work, the work of one yew researcher, Janice Fry. She has been able to identify that probably around 2,000 years ago, a large part of the British Isles was inhabited by yew tribes, peoples who venerated the yew. So at one time, it was really a guiding being to the British Isles and also to many parts of Europe. Of course, you know, we've lost many of those yews now, and the yew is no longer protected in Britain, which is a sad reality.
Well, and I think that's just one other piece before we go to the society, because I'd like to touch in on that society. Wasn't there somebody in royalty whose name actually means the Duke or Prince of? Is it York? Is it actually or there was another name you shared with me that it was just funny to think of him as.
I think it might have been the Archbishop of York. The Archbishop of York, to this day, continues to sign his name, Man of Yew, on documents. You know, now bear in mind that the Romans, when they were Christianizing Britain, they deliberately went to the centers where the yews were located and attempted to Christianize those centers. So it's no mere accident that one of their main centers was York, Yew Town. But they went as far as the north of England to sacred yew sites and attempted to Christianize them, taking over the sites there. So it was known. Remember, the Romans had been in Britain hundreds of years before, so they had a living memory of these ancient beings, and the fact that the yew was a guiding being, a guiding intelligence to the peoples of the British Isles. So they already knew this. So they knew when they were Christianizing the country that's where they needed to go to the yew centers directly if they wanted to be able to bring their hegemonic, you know, teachings. So
yeah, places of power, they radiate. So before we go into more about the yews, the principles of the yew, the consciousness, the attributes, etc., I'd like to go to a site that you've shared with me, because there is actually an organization in the UK that is dedicated to preserving and protecting the yew, and then there's actually even a whole island of yews. So can you speak a little bit to this organization and to the island that's for sale right now?
Yeah, this is quite an interesting timing, really, all of this. Well, Scotland's Yew Tree Heritage Initiative is really a small group of people who are seeking to bring awareness of Scotland's yew tree heritage, the way it's embedded into the history, into the land, into the mythology, into legend. And you see these are two of my friends here, Paul and Bryony, who, what's really lovely actually about this story for me on a sort of personal level is that Paul and Bryony came together through attending the Yew Mysteries workshops. So that's how they met. Now, Paul is a leading expert on the yew, and Paul and I had got to know each other many years ago, because there's very few of us involved to this level with the yew. So Paul had informed many of the books that had come out on yew, taken many of the photographs that appeared in the books. He's a real font of knowledge around the yew. So he and I became friends, and he then began to participate in the Yew Mysteries because he knew that he wanted to also delve into the mysteries of the yew. And in so doing, he met Bryony, and they then set up this Scottish Yew Tree Heritage Initiative. So right now, Paul's work both of their work has been very important. But they discovered an island for sale, Inchlonig, a yew island. Actually, Inchlonig means yew island, and it's in Loch Lomond. Loch Lomond is kind of, well, there it is. Now, how beautiful is that? Now, isn't that spectacular? This is going to kind of blow your mind. There are over 800 yews on that island. And that island is only 182 acres in size. So it's and really is a wonder of the world, this island, to have that many yews on it. And the story goes that Robert the Bruce, who many of you will probably know, the King of Scotland back in the 14th century, he planted many of these yews. And the story goes, and I'm not sure if this is entirely the full story, but that he planted these yews to be able to create more possibilities of getting longbows, yew longbows, to be able to use in warfare, and to restock after battles like the Battle of Bannockburn, for example. But also, I think the Bruce was also he also understood the sacredness of the tree as well. So it's a sacred island. It's a holy yew island in the middle of Loch Lomond, and it's for sale right now. So if anybody has $1 million and they feel like they could spare $1 million, then get in touch with Paul and Bryony at the Sacred Yew Tree Heritage Initiative, and bear in mind, anybody who wants to contribute, they're actually, Paul and Bryony right now are trying to find ways of securing the island so that it doesn't go into developers who could then do what they like with the island. So it's time is of the essence there. I mean, it's quite funny. I didn't know anything about this at all until just a few days ago. So it's really timely that we can talk about this. So if you know anybody who you think could donate or who could help, you can get in touch with me directly, or you can get in touch with the Yew Tree Heritage Initiative directly and speak to Paul and Bryony about it. So
beautiful. I've put the link in the chat. So everybody who's on Zoom, if you're in the room, those 3 dots at the bottom, you can either save chat or you just put it near to the right of the posting. And there's 3 dots and there's a copy button there. So if anybody would like to hang on to that. So beautiful. So I'd like to let's see which way we're going to go right now, because we're going to go in 2 different streams tonight. Should we go? Would you share with us some of what you call the principles of yew consciousness? Those are my words, not your words, but these principles that you have come to know through this very deep and very long personal initiation and I believe transmission from you to you of these principles. Not trying to be cute, but you to you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'll share whatever comes out. I mean, I never know how it's going to really emerge, but I mean, the principles kind of come out of really the initial 9 or 10 years of my time with that yew that you saw in the picture there. And, as we all know here and gathered here, that, these kinds of peak experiences that we have, or these very intense experiences that we really need to work with them for over a period of time and to try and develop a language for them. And for me, there was just so much going on there over that 9 or 10 year period that it was, and it was so much what was bound up with my own healing. So my consciousness was almost subsumed by what was happening around me. There wasn't an awful lot of kind of rational framework to be able to hook into. So much of it was visceral, so much of it was um, about the blood, about how I felt my blood was being healed from, being very, very sick for a very, very long time. And it was only really after that very intense incubatory period of 9 years that I began to really begin to, how would you say, begin to develop a language that I could actually communicate to others. At first, it was really impossible to be able to even speak about it. I mean, I didn't really talk to even close friends. It was very difficult to share. But over a period of time, probably 25 years or so, I really began to find my way with the language. And it was interesting because, when you've had these kinds of experiences, I was an art student. I didn't really come into this through the lens of um, somebody who had a proclivity, although, perhaps Danielea can ask me questions about that later in childhood. Obviously, I did have a proclivity to the unseen realms, but that was an unnamed thing for me at that time. So the arts my gravity. That's where I gravitated to, was the arts, where I could kind of exercise that part of myself. So I came to this really with no background. So having gone through these experiences, you're looking for a way of stabilizing them. You're looking for a language, and I couldn't really find it in the shamanic books. And when people introduced me to things that I didn't really know anything about, first I hadn't even heard of shamanism, and then people showed me books and said, that sounds like you're going through a shamanic initiation. So I looked at the books, and nothing was really quite helping me to really understand my experience. But it was only when I began to look at the process of our own origins, of our own embryological development, that I began to see my own experiences reflected back at me. That my experiences of healing under the tree sort of recapitulated certain embryonic gestures of how we come into form. So my healing followed a sort of embryological logic in some kind of ways, an embryological unfoldment in some ways. So I started to see a language in the blood, a language in how we form out of the blood, how we form through the blood. And I began to see that in the embryology. So the embryology began to give me a kind of a way of kind of hooking my experiences into a language where I could sort of begin to derive certain principles from that I could communicate. For example, I talk a lot about mantles in the as Bernard will know, because Bernard has actually come through the entire Yew Mysteries training with me, and he is what I call one of our Yew initiates. So Bernard is very dedicated and has very knowledgeable person now about the Yew and practices with the work. So Bernard will understand this language, but I began to talk about mantles because what was happening to me beneath the Yew was that where what I understood as my form, the form we have, this kind of embodied form, was no longer so reliable to me. And there was often a sense where there would be a communication of the mind of the Yew into my blood, and a sort of almost as though the blood could be taken and sort of lifted out of the body to create a sort of another shape. So there was another shape began to kind of form around me that would almost take the shape of the actual interior of the chamber, almost like what you call a chorion in the embryo, this kind of membrane. And that membrane began to become sentient for me. I began to feel myself sentient, feel myself able to kind of touch and feel through this sort of surface that was expanded, that was much more kind of etheric than it was physical. And the more I was able to inhabit that space, the more I was able to find healing. So I often call that the mantle, the blood mantle. And that's something we work with a lot in the Yew Mysteries is how do we really, who are we as embodied human beings? Is this where it finishes? Or is there more to us than, I'm not talking about microbiomes or auras or anything like that. I'm talking about something incarnate. you know, who are we as incarnate beings was a question I kept coming up with for myself. Clearly, embodiment was much more than we had been taught, because I was beginning to realize in order to heal, I had to find this other gesture of embodiment that was actually through a principle in my blood, and it was creating a kind of a shape for me that I was able to start to find myself and find a shape that actually was intelligent, sentient, and began to perform healing functions for me. So
Michael, I'm gonna pause you for a second, because I think there's might be some people who maybe not have heard your story yet. And
yes,
would it be fair to say that your encounter, you had an encounter as a young man in your 20s with an energy that through the course of that encounter, would it be fair to say that energy encounter actually broke down your body as you knew it? I mean, we call it illness, we call it being sick, right? It was an illness. But I'm curious if your thought was now is that maybe even the purpose of you encountering that being as a young man, and where you encountered it, was actually to break you down so that you ended up under that yew tree and actually needed to receive this information in your blood, and then to be able to actually embody and incarnate this new mantle of blood. Would that be
yes.
fair to say that you think that that's really what happened?
I think that's very fair, yeah. And you know, I've told that story many times, so I won't go over the whole story about the being that I met there. But yeah, let's say it was an ancient guardian of the earth, and it was very close to a nuclear reprocessing center. It was a year after Chernobyl, or actually only a few months after Chernobyl disaster. So there was something in the air, let's say. Um, and I was only about 23 years old at that time. So my
And
life was,
Michael, you were planting trees, weren't you? You were a tree planter.
ironically, yes, yes.
You was a
I was
tree planter.
I was with a friend of mine from art school called Ewan, and Ewan means yew tree. There we were up in the very northern tip of Scotland. It's a place called Thurso, which actually means Thor's River. It's a very barren place. There's very few trees there. And as I said to you, Danielea, when we were talking, at that time I had no understanding of what was around me, what the geography was of that land. I went back just a few years ago while I was writing my book to do some research, and the area is filled with standing stones, Iron Age mounds, basically, you know, she mounds, shining ones, presence, and uh, recumbent stones, and just all of these features in the landscape, which imply that this was a very powerful, powerful landscape at one time. So there was a nuclear reprocessing center just kind of planted into this place. And then me going up there, planting trees, and then having this encounter. And again, as you just very well said, being dismantled, being sort of dissolved, being broken down, and then finding my way slowly 7 years later to the Yew in the south of Scotland. So what's really interesting, we didn't talk about this, was that is actually there's a geomantic corridor, and you know some people argue about this, but it's called the Rose Line, and it runs right down through Scotland, right down through Rosslyn Chapel, through Edinburgh, right down into Wales. And a lot of my experiences with the Yew have taken place on that line, because where I encountered the being was on that line in the north. Then I came south, encountered the Yew very close to that line in the south, and then our first Yew Mysteries training was on that line again in Abergavenny in Wales. So there's something going on there around that geomantic corridor and the Yews. So and maybe
Yeah.
my particular experience. So thought I'd add that, throw that in there. So
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That there is something there. I am sure of it. Yeah. At what point would you say that you became aware, and the Yew Mysteries themselves as a school, as something you are meant to share and open to others? At what point did you realize that this was something you were supposed to offer to others? Was there a certain point when you felt, it's Well, sometimes we use the language when an experience has metabolized, when it's metabolized inside, ourselves, then we're ready to then give something away. As you say, you have language, etc. So say a little bit about that, when that started to happen for you.
Yeah, I mean, the word metabolize, as anybody who's worked with me knows, I use a lot. So I recognize that very much. So yes, there had to be a metabolizing of my experiences before that would happen, and it was really a lot to do with actually, ironically, coming to the United States. I had seen myself as a how would you say it, like a guardian of the yew tree, that I was going to have a quiet existence, living very close to the yew tree, being there every day, having, being very much in a quiet place, just doing my work with the yew, going every day, continuing with my healing, and continuing, to hopefully evolve and get on with my life. Although much of my life had been consumed by that experience with the yew. So, um, and I had really come to terms with that. But through the arts, through winning a prize, I won't go into that all now because it's too long a story. To paint, I was catapulted to Vermont to paint landscapes. I then met who was to become my 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 future wife at that time, was also an artist, and through a whole series of difficulties with immigration for her and things like that, I ended up going to the USA. But I was very, very emotionally. That was the last thing I thought about doing. The last thing I expected was to be leaving the presence, the physical presence of the yew. But what I realized was that, and the yew communicated with me, was no, I actually need you to leave. I will be with you. I will be around you. I'm saturating you at all times. You need to leave. I will be here for thousands of years more. You will not. I need you to be my emissary. I need you to go out into the world. I need you to speak. I need you to bring um, some of this out into the consciousness of humanity in this small, as it turns out, as we know in these ways, relatively small way in terms of the numbers of people that one actually who actually hear this. They hear the voice of the yew. It's not a lot of people actually, which is fine. But when people hear the voice of the yew, they hear the voice of the yew. So in some ways, me bringing the work out has just helped to bring that surface a little further out, to bring that mantle a little further out, so that the eternity of the yew, that great eternal mind, can begin to touch more people. And that's been happening. So yes, metabolized, then life changes, kicking and screaming to come to the United States, and then finding myself here, and ironically then being invited back to the UK to bring the world. Let me just jump back a little bit. Coming to the United States was the great thing about coming to this country of the United States, was that people were interested in what they helped to bring me out of myself, I think. So, I remember walking in Cambridge, in Boston. I lived in Boston for a few years, and I had no job, given everything up. I thought, what am I doing here? Who am I? Where am I going? And I remember walking up Mass Ave. I used to go up, I loved to look at the Charles River, and I walked up, and there was a New Age bookshop up there, and it was called, now what was it called now? Oh, one of you, probably somebody there will know. Oh gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the book. I don't know if it's there now, but it was a well-known New Age bookshop up in Cambridge. And I walked in, and I was looking around, and I got talking to the shop owner, and they said, "Look, I'm really liking what you're saying. This is really interesting. Come and do a workshop here." And that was the first workshop I did, was actually in this little bookstore in Cambridge, Massachusetts, to this kind of a bunch of really interested people, very interested, but extremely perplexed by what I was saying. And then from there, word got out a little bit more, and finally, um, a lovely couple called Emma and David Farrell, who are into plant consciousness people. They're very involved in the plant community in the UK. They invited me over to speak about the yew, and they just realized that there was something that had to be shared that I was saying. And they invited me back and said, look, can you begin to, you know, bring what you've learned and begin to just, you know, spend more time with people, perhaps bring more form to it. So it was really inseparable from the people around me who've helped to draw me out and help me to bring this into a form that I could share. So
Mm. You
so
know,
yeah.
that makes sense to me, Michael. I mean, I know from my own experience of, you know, more than a decade with, you know, many different nature elders. Similarly, I didn't have a language for what I was going through. And so I couldn't really speak to anybody. And I didn't even know why either. I mean, didn't know why until COVID happened. And then the listening field was born. And then I understood. Um, Sorry, let me just find that thread again. Ah, I believe that for some knowledge that's carried by individuals, there needs to be a call. It's the kind of like, it's the kind of knowledge that, I don't know, it's so intimate, or maybe because it comes from such a personal experience, that to just to voluntarily speak it doesn't feel right. But when somebody asks a question, then it feels okay, there's the invitation from the world for this knowledge to come forth. So that's just what that reminded me of when you said that, you know, your proclivity would be to just live quietly, you know, but that wasn't what your particular connection with you was about. So I'm wondering if we take a few moments and maybe we'll look at a few more photos. And then I'd like to also hear a little bit about what you think the Yew has to say for us now in society. But let me just bring up these slides because there's some beautiful images to share. So, legged one. Can you see this? Yeah, you can. Okay.
That's really just the lower part of a of a yew in Wales. Now, forgive me, but I've forgotten exactly where that is and the name of it. So I could easily find that out for you a little bit later. It's just gone out of my mind at this moment. But um, this is a yew that, you know, you can see the wall has been built around it. And we kind of, it looks like a kind of being that's walking right through the wall, doesn't it? You know, it's kind of walking towards us or away from us. But when I was visiting in this yew, it's kind of a funny story, but if you look into that space there and you see the through into the, yeah, exactly. Well, that was all covered in, that was all filled with barbed wire and broken
Oops.
glass, bits of rock and all kinds of things in there. And of course, not really understanding why that was, and I should really have thought this through, but I said about cleaning all of this out. You know, that's terrible. And all this barbed wire in there and broken glass and all of this kind of thing. Of course, after I had finished, I realized, oh no, it's to stop the sheep from getting into the to getting into the actual
Oops.
the church grounds, the graveyard. Because if you look through, there's a church in there and a graveyard. So somebody would have been somebody in the church would have been, you know, cursing me after that act. So I was not, I probably wasn't very popular. So this is the um, Dyfynach yew in Wales. Now, this is a very interesting yew because there are actually two almost identical yews like this standing apart from one another. And they were DNA tested and they're actually the same tree. So over a period of time, these two had walked away from each other. So there obviously had been a kind of a division somewhere, a hole appearing, and the the yew began to kind of split, if you like, and it kind of began to drift apart. So actually what was formed was what looks like two distinct yew trees In fact, it's the same tree that has walked apart. So we like to refer to those as walking yews, where they actually walk away from each other. So this is a very, very powerful being, and again sits in a churchyard. Many of the yews, or in fact the majority of the yews, the ancient yews, sit in churchyards. And I'll not get into that too much because there's a lot to that relationship, good and bad. The yew I spent time under, there is no church there. That's what makes it very rare, because that yew was allowed, and I said at the beginning, allowed to fulfill itself. Now that yew that I spent time in was allowed to fulfill a gesture of creating an interior dimension. The yew wants to create an inside. It wants to create an inside. And it's almost as though it's creating an inside that is separate, a world, a realm that becomes separate from this world. So the yew as a being of the other world, and the Irish stories will tell us that the yew came out of the other world, was gifted to us from the other world. So this interiority of the yew brings the other world into this world. So when you enter a fulfilled yew, the way I did, and the way that I spent all of that time there, you're literally entering the other world. You're entering a place where the laws are not the same laws that we are used to around, our particular reality. So you're literally entering a different reality. Now, not only that, but the yew gives off a hallucinogenic toxin from its bark, from all parts of itself, actually. So you're actually walking into what I've named through my work over the years, and this is something that I've given its name, is the alkaloid cloud, or the alkaloid mist. So the yew gives off an alkaloid toxin, which is actually hallucinogenic. So when you enter that space, especially a sealed space, as you can imagine, you're basically entering into the mind of the yew. You're entering into its consciousness. So whereas we're used to having this notion of psychoactive plants being ingested to be able to create an experience, the yew needs to ingest us. We have to yield in a different kind of way. We have to be prepared to enter into the mind of the yew. The yew then metabolizes us. We become then changed. We have to yield. Our consciousness is changed by the mind of a yew through its alkaloid mist, through its alkaloid cloud. And that was something that I began to understand. It was when I went under there, immediately my consciousness was changed. And often that resulted in what initially I thought was sleep. In actual fact, it was a higher state of consciousness that was beginning with sleep. The yew had to put me to sleep, to shut me up, to get rid of that busy mind that wants to label and wants to name things, and it wants to have an experience that it can recognize and take a hold of and walk away with. And you said, oh no, you come into my mind, I'm going to dissolve that mind of yours. That human mind is going to be dissolved. I will give you the mind that you will walk away with. I will give you. And that came out of often a profound stillness. So it's not informational. It wasn't as though you go into the yew and get a download of all kinds of information that you could write in a notebook. It wasn't like that. This is why it was so difficult to understand the yew's mind, because you have to actually yield. You have to be in that consciousness, and you have to wait. You have to be prepared to wait. In my case, I'm saying prepared, I didn't really have any choice, because I was kind of compelled to go, and I would go and I would put to sleep. I would have seizures there. I would wake up, everything would look different, and I would be basically sort of in an unrecognizable world. And I wouldn't know I wouldn't have an apparatus to be able to think or recognize what was going on. And I would be saturated with the yew's consciousness. And in order to really do that, I had to really kind of come out of my nervous system and find this new embodiment, this new form that the yew was signaling to me through my blood. And this cycles back to that whole notion of it was pulling me out of myself. It was giving me a hint that a human being could be other, that we're not finished. We're not a finished being. We're not done yet. So it was challenging me to say, what is the new embodiment of a human? Or what can a human embody that hasn't yet been embodied? Where are we going as a human being? The you holds the seeds of the new human embodiment. I know that sounds a very dramatic thing to say, but the you's mind shows us. I'm not saying it's the only teacher of that. Would not say that, but it's actually signaling us to pay attention to who we are as embodied beings and who we might become. And there's no accident that the you is when its Hittite name is Ea, and Ea means, was translated actually not too long ago. It means eternity, or by extension, to be touched by eternity. So when you go inside of a you, when you enter into that consciousness, you are being touched by eternity. And when you're touched by eternity, you're then challenged to change everything. Everything that you think you know needs to dissolve. And you will be given new organs of perception, a new way of being, and you won't be able to hold on to it. You won't be able to own it. There's no ownership with the you. You can't take that out of there and say it's yours. You can't take that out of there and say, this is my knowledge and this is mine and I have this. You have to constantly be prepared to be dissolved and rebuilt by the you. Constantly. So that's the mantra with the you, really.
I so feel this, Michael, from the moment I heard you speak in another interview. No, I think it was one of the presentations at one of the conferences, quite a few pre-COVID, where I heard you speak of it. I personally have had to go through that complete breakdown process myself a couple of times in my life, basically be wiped, it's like a mind wipe kind of thing. So I can relate. And every time we've talked about her, her frequency, her energy, her spirit starts to hover around. And we are coming into the last bit of time we have together. So I wanted to invite people in the audience, if you have any questions for Michael that you'd like to put in the chat, I will present them to him. Meanwhile, I'd like to say to you, I also have this sense that there's no accident. Again, this comes from an experience with the listening field emerging in COVID when I couldn't travel to study with my elders, then discovering that we don't need to travel. I don't need to travel, that we can open a field like the listening field and communicate and continue. But I have this sense that I know that you were bringing the Yew Mysteries out, the levels of initiation are on your website. And then COVID happened. Right. And so everything stopped for you. And then we see over the past couple of years, and especially this year in 2023, everyone that who has been communicating with nature in their own ways, in their own paths, many of us for, decades, are coming forward now, are coming out. So everywhere we turn, these summits and conversations with nature. So I feel the consciousness has shifted and is now, I would say, many, many more people are receptive to this idea, A, that we're multidimensional beings, B, we've only really tapped into a tiny bit of who we are really meant to be. We see what we don't need to be anymore because of the destruction that it has created. So we have that, 1,000-year example. So do you think that you're going to be bringing the Yew Mysteries forward for people to actually participate in them in the near future? I know you've been working on a book, but I'm really interested in personally when you might be bringing these forward for those of us who do hear a call to begin to tap into that mystery a little.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, I'm in a place of suspension. I think there's probably, let me see, towards the end of 2019, I had all of the Yew Mysteries workshops arranged for the following year. We know what happened. But at the end of that 2019, the Yew spoke to me viscerally, speaks to me. It's not like an informational kind of chat conversation, but after being working with the Yew so long, I was able to understand the voice, and the Yew was basically saying to me, there's going to be a retreating of this work, and there's going to be a retreating of my consciousness for some time. And I said, well, to myself, well, that can't be, because I've got all these workshops planned, in my human mind, I've got all these workshops planned for next year. The Yew Mysteries is on a roll. We're doing this. And the Yew was, well, no, you're not, actually. And of course, we know what happened. And I thought, oh, okay. So the Yew was, precognitive, ahead of us as usual. And I haven't really had the definitive sense that it's time to bring the work back yet. I'm feeling the edges of that now, and I'm feeling that next year is probably going to be the time where the Yew Mysteries will make a reappearance, and probably in a new form. There's going to have to be some dissolving out of the forms that were there before. So I don't know exactly what it's going to look like now. I have to be true to the process and follow it, even though I painstakingly work so hard to kind of create this. It may have a new shape now, or it may have a similar shape, but there might be some changes. But I think, to answer your question, I think I'm feeling that next year is going to be. I actually turned down a lot of invitations this year to present things around the Yew in person, to do workshops. There was one in England and a couple of festivals here in the US, and I just had this very strong no that from the Yew that it wasn't time. And there would have been one in August in England, which I was, my human self was attracted to, but the Yew was not going to let me go. So they've invited me back next year to that. So I think that will be happening. And also, I'm pretty sure that some of the coordinators who've been bringing forth the work in Scotland will want to bring it back. We have an amazing site in Scotland, near Edinburgh, which is a breathtaking site of a Yew, again, that has fulfilled itself. A great chamber that we can all gather in, and we can do the work in this chamber, and we can have quite large groups. So it will return, but
I understand. I really understand. Similar for me in terms of with the work with the nature elders and the timing, and also especially, I've been told several times, like, don't bring it forward in the way that you were before. There's a new way, and then have to wait and be obedient to that. I mean, I would never actually question them because of it. So we just have a couple of minutes left, but Mary had a question in the chat. This is probably a yes or no answer. Are you still going through a breaking down and rebuilding process now? Yes or no?
Oh gosh, can I say a little bit more than yes or no?
Sure.
Great question. I think I have to be very disciplined. So there's always a process of dissolving and rebuilding going on for me, and I have to just stay with its fulcrum. I have to stay always following where its center point is, always following where its balance point is, and its balance point shifts constantly. So it's a constant communication with the Yew, with the mind of the Yew, in terms of my own viscera, my own embodiment, my own sense of self. So there's always a change happening. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. And one other little bit, have you planted some yew trees in the USA? Have you felt that call, and have you done that?
I have, yeah, I have tried to save several yews that were for the chop, sometimes with success, sometimes not with success. But I have planted a few seeds and things like that, and we'll see what happens with that. But more and more now, as I sit with this, more and more I see that the Yew needs to just be really left alone to do its own thing. And there are several Yew temples in this area. I call them Yew temples. The Yew grows differently here. It's called Taxus canadensis. It grows across the forest floor, but it also grows in and nestles into these great sort of rock hollows. So you can basically kind of nestle yourself, get inside of this great skin, this great flowing sort of skin of Yew, and sort of settle in there. around the porcupines. The porcupines are the protectors of the yews over here. So interesting animals. And wherever you go to these places, you'll see the porcupines. So I'm befriending the porcupines and the yews in all of the yew temples out in Western Massachusetts. So, and there are a great many.
So some of you know the listing field developed online over the past 3 years, and now I'm being guided to bring it on land. And so we're starting to do that. We have an event tomorrow, actually, and you can check my the listing field Facebook page or Danielea Castell online to see more information about that. However, I wanted to just point out that this is a yew that Michael has visited on Galliano Island. So this is a place we could take a little trip to visit this yew elder here in Galliano. So just wanted to give you a little enticement. And then this is Michael's website. So yewmysteries.com. And it's a beautiful, beautiful site. I really appreciate the design of it. It's really carrying that mystery energy to it, beautifully made and wonderful information on it. So I just highly recommend it.